A lot of conflict and a lot of challenges that we face when it comes to interpersonal relationships of any sort come down to a misassumption when it comes to intent.
So we are here with Heidi Priebe, and we're so happy to have you here. So you're an expert in Myers-Briggs personality types, and it's such a fascinating topic. But what first drew you into this concept?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually first took a personality test in high school. So my grade 12 English teacher had us all take it as kind of a pre-college exploration thing. And it was just one of those things that really clicked with me. It was the first time I'd kind of seen the inner workings of my mind explained to me in a way that explained things about myself that I couldn't even come up with on my own. So that really drew me into exploring the rest of the system and using it to kind of understand where the differences between myself and others were coming from and how to bridge those differences. And I find it's a really interactive system that you can take a lot of places, which has kept my obsession with it just growing and growing over time.
And it's so critical for us to understand that in our life as we move forward with career relationships, just to know that interaction and to have that piece of knowledge. So that's awesome. Do you think that our Myers-Briggs letters are static, or do they change over the course of a lifetime?
So that's actually probably the number one question that I get all the time, that people constantly ask. So often people will test differently over the course of their lifetime, but that is more a flaw of the test itself than it is a product of people's personality changing. So definitely we all develop, we mature over the course of our lives, but what we define as personality is that which remains the same, the way that we process things and make decisions that doesn't change over the course of our lives. So we might learn to mitigate our decision-making a little more. We hopefully learn more about ourselves and kind of understand where our blind spots are and how to even those out as we age. But at the end of the day, personality comes down to where you're naturally getting your energy from. So even when we're working hard to maybe behave a different way in a different context as is needed across the span of our lives, it always comes back to when do we feel most energized and most alive and most ourselves. And those are the traits that we can call personality, those things that we return to over the course of our lives that bring us that natural sense of joy and energy.
That's fascinating. And that leads into my next question. To what extent do you think that external factors, such as profession or home environment, influence a person's letters?
So those will definitely influence the way that we behave. So kind of a common misconception about personality, and I think the reason this exists is because we define personality a lot of different ways. But within the scope of Myers-Briggs specifically, we're not looking at behavior, we're actually looking at the way that we're processing information. So we can force ourselves to act in a way that's contrary to our natural tendencies. So a lot of people, for example, who have a perceiving preference, which has a preference for leaving things kind of open-ended and exploring things rather than deciding on them prematurely, they have to pull out their judging side in the workplace, which is often very deadline-driven. So we'll have people who might say, like, I'm a judger in the workplace, I'm a perceiver in my home life. But you should always be looking at what you would do naturally if you didn't have constraints. And that's your core personality. So the idea is you can kind of fake being a different personality for a while, but that doesn't change who you really are. It just changes what you're doing for a period of time.
Absolutely. And understanding that, I think, would help alleviate a lot of that internal struggle that people feel and don't understand why. So that's great. What advice do you have for a coach who might want to incorporate Myers-Briggs into their practice?
First of all, I think that's just a really great idea to get started with. I think it shows a lot of insight that you're looking into what your client needs, as opposed to just coming in with your own agenda and assuming it's going to work for everyone. Because one approach might work perfectly for one personality and not at all for another person. So I think just taking the time to get to know your clients very well and understand how they're approaching problems, where their natural energy comes from, is going to help you to be able to get them to set goals that are actually going to work for them. So I think just taking that time to really talk to your client, get to deeply understand them, and And also don't always necessarily trust their test results because there is a wide variability in there. So I think the best thing a coach can do for themselves and their clients is to get to know the system really well if they want to implement it, and then go into it with an open mind. So just because your client tests as an INTJ or whatever it is they come out as, that might not be their true type preference. Right. So really take the time to get to know them on an individual level and work with them on it and have it be a dynamic and interactive thing rather than just kind of going by the stereotypes that you might read about certain types.
And I think going through that process as well would allow a really trusting relationship to be built and that rapport to be established. So,
absolutely, yeah. Helping someone explore themselves and understand themselves is one of the most close. It's one of the closest things you can do with someone else is helping them understand new things about themselves. So I think it's only natural that trust would build out of that.
And it's such an important foundation, especially in a coaching relationship. So it just makes sense to enter the coaching relationship with this.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So interestingly, do people have to take a Myers-Briggs personality test to know their type?
That's a great question. No, definitely not. So there are a lot of ways to kind of go about it. I always recommend, if you want a quick and easy reference point, try taking a test, see what you get, see what the answer comes out as. But I think it's really important to take the answer with a grain of salt because there is a lot of error within the test, and there's also a lot of human error just with biases we might hold about ourselves that aren't necessarily objective. So I think it's important to look at whatever results you do get and then explore a few other options. Look at similar types, and usually they'll suggest at the bottom, if this doesn't quite fit, look at this type or this type. And keep going until you really do feel like that type is spot on for you. And that really is the way that you're taking things in and making decisions. Because it has such power once you get there. But if you're looking at the wrong result, it's not going to get you as far as it could otherwise.
And there's so many different versions of the Myers-Briggs test, especially online.
Yeah.
So that can maybe be an issue as well for consistency and also just accuracy.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I think the only way to truly figure out your type is to learn the theory really deeply, which takes time and it takes patience, but I think it's really worth it in the end. The payoff is great because you are actually learning it's kind of like looking under the hood of your personality and what makes you tick rather than just like looking at the car from the outside. It goes really deep into the way you're processing things. And I think that's a lot more rewarding than just taking that test and getting that result will be in the long run.
Yeah. And very much in alignment with Myers-Briggs. As you know, at IIN, we teach the concept of primary food. So everything that nourishes us that isn't actually food, such as exercise, spirituality, and relationships. So how do you think Myers-Briggs ties into this?
I think it ties really, really perfectly into that, to be honest. So when you look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right after our needs for food and safety and shelter, we have the need for love and belonging. And I think that a lot of times, especially in kind of the Western world, we try to bypass that need and go straight to self-actualization. But it's in the middle for a reason. We need to find we need to find our interpersonal self, and we need to understand how we relate to other people, where we fit in a community, and we need to feel that sense of acceptance both for ourselves and for other people. And I think understanding personality differences takes away a lot of the natural conflict that exists between people,
right.
And it allows you to form more genuine connections with them. Because I think a lot of conflict comes down to personality clashes and people thinking that if I were to do what this person had done, this would be my intention behind it, therefore it was also theirs. But when we learn that people are processing things in a different way, it allows us to take a step back and understand where people are coming from, which gets us back to that place of connection. And I think that that's incredibly important for our psychological health, which in turn influences our physical health. So I think it's an incredibly powerful tool we can use to help us fulfill that need.
Have you personally seen through practice people's physical health improve after having understood their personality type and maybe have that as an aha moment for them?
Oh, I love that question. I can say for a fact it has for me. Just understanding myself and being able to approach my relationships from a healthier place bleeds into every area of my life. It helps with self-confidence, which helps with energy, which helps with just having the confidence and the motivation to make healthier choices in every area of my life. And I think it has the power to do that for anyone, really.
Absolutely. And I think it also helps clear up any expectations, as you were saying, with interpersonal relationships. Sometimes we put these expectations on others that they may not even realize. So it helps lines of communication as well. I think it just runs the whole gamut of really improving the way in which we feel and can interact with others.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times we don't recognize the love that's being extended towards us. And in the same vein, other people don't always recognize the way that we're extending love towards them. Right. And I think this system really helps us to stop and understand the different ways that people are giving and receiving that care, that attention. And it's very nourishing to realize that we are receiving a lot more love than we think we are. Right. And for other people to be able to feel that for us, I think that has a very strong influence on health.
Especially with the varying backgrounds that people have and the way in which they were raised. I'm sure you have seen a lot of internal conflict just based on like family relationships being established at a young age and how that has progressed over time for people and where they're left as an adult figuring out where they are. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating. But how might Myers-Briggs help people develop greater compassion for humanity and appreciation for our differences?
Oh, I love that. I think it gives a very solid and very tangible framework for understanding not only which lenses other people are kind of looking at the world through, but which lenses we're looking at the world through that we might not realize are biasing our points of view. And I think that, like I was saying before, and like we were talking about before, a lot of conflict and a lot of challenges that we face when it comes to interpersonal relationships of any sort come down to a misassumption when it comes to intent. So assuming that because someone said this or because they acted in this way, it must have been because they had malicious intent. Right. And I think so much of understanding personality differences can boil down to removing that sense of malicious intent and understanding that people are coming from different places. So it gives a lot of context to people's actions. And I think once you start thinking in that way, once you wire your mind to start looking at context, it starts seeing that everywhere. So you start seeing it when there's a Facebook debate raging. Right. You're able to step back and look at, okay, this person comes from this background, or maybe they're saying it because these are the extenuating circumstances that the other person is not dealing with, but they are. So it gets you in the practice of contextualizing your thinking and coming at situations from a place of compassion and from a desire to understand, rather than just that kind of primal urge to win or to have your opinion prevail, which I think is a very natural impulse that we have to train ourselves out of.
Yeah. And also, too, just being able to maybe not feel victimized sometimes. I think that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And you see that happen and then it escalates. And it's like, if this could have stopped from the beginning, then it would have saved a whole bunch of stress. And
100%. I think that kind of gets people into the me versus them mentality right away, right? As soon as you feel as though someone's not understanding your point of view. But I think often a very quick way to diffuse a situation like that is to show that you understand theirs. And if you can do that, it kind of puts you on less hostile ground where people begin listening to each other more. But someone has to be the first one to do it, right?
Right.
So when we train people to start using those skills, or when people train themselves to start using those skills, I think it can very naturally take away that sense of victimhood very quickly when you realize that a lot of the time when you thought someone was saying something for a certain reason, you were wrong. And it just lessens that hostile worldview over time.
And it's so important for health coaches to know how to do that, because they're working in alignment with this client who may be going through something like that, and to be able to break those walls down and to help them progress in a way that's going to benefit them. I think it's such a viable skill. So I've heard this saying, like attracts like, but I've also heard opposites attract. So when it comes to Myers-Briggs personality types, which of these would you say is more accurate?
That's another question that's probably the second most frequently asked question. So there's a lot of different theories on that. The kind of prevailing theory, so you get 4 letters when you take a Myers-Briggs test, and the second letter refers to how you process information. So that's either N or S, intuition or sensing. And one of the commonly agreed upon theories is that people who share a preference for the way they process information tend to get along more naturally. So intuitives tend to have a more natural sense of understanding where other intuitives are coming from. Sensors tend to have a more natural sense of understanding where other sensors are coming from. So we see more, I almost call it dialectical differences. Like they're speaking the same language, but slight differences that make it easier to communicate with each other. So it's commonly agreed upon that someone who shares your second letter might be an easier match. But everything other than that, people seem to be able to mitigate pretty well. So my personal opinion is that more similarity tends to lead to a greater ease in communication, because someone is naturally coming from some of the same angles you're coming from, so you can kind of meet them in more places. But that being said, there is so much benefit in reaching out to those relationships where you're being challenged to think differently. So I think a key part of that question is asking yourself, which type of relationship am I looking for? Like when people are looking for a partner, everyone wants to know what's my perfect match. But my question in response to that is, well, do you want a partner in crime? Do you want to be challenged? Do you want someone who's gonna call you out when you're being ridiculous? Absolutely. Or do you want someone you can just goof around and be silly with? And I think that's a more important question to ask yourself than what type should I look for, because that question will naturally lead to which type you should look for. If you're looking for someone more like yourself or the opposite.
And again, getting people to really dig deep into themselves and go to a place where they may not have thought before, I just think opens up a whole new opportunity for them to kind of conceptualize their future and what that may hold for them, instead of just kind of acting on that primal instinct,
100%. I think a lot of people kind of want to take a test and they want the test to do the work for them. And they want it to be like, here's all the answers and here's your partner you should choose and the life path you should choose. But I think the more you dig into the theory, the more questions you realize you have to look into yourself for. Absolutely. But it gives you kind of a roadmap of, here's the way you normally think of things. But hey, here's an alternate way that maybe because your type preference is X, Y, or Z, you're neglecting looking at. So it kind of gives you a good roadmap of where you should be going within yourself to pose those questions, which is, I think, one of the most powerful applications of the system.
Absolutely. That's really fascinating. Cool. So we teach the importance of seeking balance in life for optimal health and happiness. So how might balance look different for each type?
That's a great question. And I actually think that's probably one of the most important ones that a coach could sit down and dwell on before meeting with a client, because balance does look very different to each personality type. So you have, for example, your NF personality type. So we group them into 4 temperament groups. And NFs are all about kind of finding spiritual balance. And a lot of what they do in life, a lot of the goals that they set is oriented towards finding that alignment with their life's purpose. So these are people who always have to find meaning in everything they do. And to them, balance is when they feel aligned with their purpose and they feel like they're in harmony with the people they love. Then you have NTs, who are kind of your more, I'd say NFs and NTs are your philosophers, but NTs kind of take a more critical edge. So to them, life is about just understanding as much about it as they can from every different angle that they can. So to them, balance is going to look like a life that is very well examined. And balance is going to be about optimizing every area of their life so that they feel as though they've left no stone left unturned. And they're able to live their lives in a way that is intellectually compatible with what they believe is right. And then you have SJs, and for them, balance is all about stability. So it's all about building things that will matter and last and outlive them. And so for them, balance means that they're working towards something that's very stable and fulfilling. And then our last group, the SPs, life is kind of a big feast to explore.
Right.
So for them, balance is about making sure that they have it within themselves to sustain a lifestyle that's varied and changing and exciting, and that they're able to be independent enough to maintain that. So if you're trying to approach an NF as an SP and you're
Right.
telling them, you know,
Yeah.
you need to cut loose
Yes.
and, you know, just throw caution into the wind. That's not necessarily what that means for them or what would make them happy. So I think one of the most important things anyone working with anyone else can do is first understand what balance and what a good life looks like to them. And then understand that that's not necessarily the case for everyone else. And once we're able to put down kind of our own biases in that way, we're able to be really open and present with other people and pick up what they're telling us about what they want out of their own lives. And I think this just kind of gives us a quick and easy framework for what that might look like for people, and then we let them fill in the rest.
Absolutely, as it should be. It should be client-led because what may feel very balanced for me may feel completely chaotic for you.
Yeah.
And if there's that disconnect there, that's going to create a wedge between the effectiveness of our coaching relationship and just any relationship really between two people, again, with that expectation. So
100%.
I think that's amazing, an amazing concept to really understand and just, you know, try and utilize moving forward. So that's fascinating information. Everything that you've shared, I'm just totally fascinated by. So thank you so much for your expertise and just sharing everything that you know. I really admire your work and how this can help health coaches and just anyone in general. So thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
There's some great questions in there.
Thanks for watching. Tell us, have you ever taken a Myers-Briggs personality test yourself? Is this something you might use with clients and coaching? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more health and wellness content like this.